Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. We are learning Maseches Yevamos daf Tzadi Daled and Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph. We're starting about a third of the way down on Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph at the words Amar Le Rav Mordechai. You guys ready to learn some Torah? Let's go, boys. So we're starting about a quarter of the way down on Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph at Amar Le Rav Mordechai. We're in the midst of a discussion of whether or not Eid Echad is ne'eman in regards to a Yevamos. So says the Gemara as follows. Maybe we can try and bring a proof. Amar le Rav Mordechai le Rav Ashi, va'amar le Rav Acha le Rav Ashi. We're not sure who said it, but they definitely said it to Rav Ashi. And says the Gemara as follows. Tashma, we have a brisa from which maybe we can learn about Eid Echad. And the Gemara says as follows. Ein ha'isha ne'emenes lomar meis yivmi she'enaseh. A woman is not allowed, she's not trusted to say that her own husband died, in order to allow her to marry her Yevama, her brother-in-law, her Yavam. And as well, v'lo mesa achosi she'ekanes lebesa. She also cannot say that her sister died in order that she could marry her sister's husband. Those two things are not allowed. Says the Gemara, he nihi de lo mehemna. We understand when we don't believe her, but what do we imply from here? Ha'ed echad mehemen. So maybe we could learn from this brisa that Eid Echad is trustworthy in regards to a woman remarrying. Says the Gemara, that does not work. According to your reasoning, what about the Seifa? Seifa, it has the case about a man, not about a woman. A man is not allowed, is not believed to say that his brother died such that he could marry his brother's wife. And as well, he's also not ne'eman to say that his wife died so that he could marry his wife's sister. And what's the diuk from the Seifa? Who nihu delo mehemen? You're right, we don't believe him, but what's the implication? Ha'ed echad mehemen, the same exact implication as the Resha. But says the Gemara, no way, that doesn't work. Why not? Bishlam agabe isha. I understand in regards to a woman why we were lenient to say that an Eid echad is ne'eman when she's the one giving testimony under certain circumstances, because Mishum iguna akilu barabanan. Ela legabe isha, but in the seifa of this brisa, when we're talking about a man, that svara doesn't apply. We don't have a concept of mishum iguna akilu barabanan because a man is never an agun, at least not in perfect form, because midoraisa, he can always marry somebody else. So therefore, there is no comparison between the Resha and the Seifa. Therefore, what was the Resha for? If we know already about that mishum iguna akilu barabanan, then what was the Resha talking about? Says the Gemara halfway down on Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph, elaki itzrich le Rabbi Akiva. The Resha of that brisa, which spoke about a woman and the inference that an Eid Echad could be ne'eman, we need that for the shita of Rabbi Akiva. How so? I might have thought as follows. We're halfway down on Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph. Since Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that there is that one can generate a mamzer simply with a tashma shamita that's chayve lavin and not chayve kares. Ema, I might have thought that chaysha akil kula dezara vidaika. I might have thought that chaysha she'll be worried akil kula dezara about ruining her child and making that child into a mamzer vidaika, and she would therefore do a lot of investigative research to confirm the death of her first husband. Kamash malan, we don't trust her. We don't trust her. Therefore, we cannot learn anything from the Resha about this. Skipping the parentheses, Rava Amar, I can show you why Eid Echad is ne'eman from Kal V'chomer. Eid Echad ne'eman b'Yevama mi Kal V'chomer. I know, says the Gemara, that an Eid Echad is trustworthy in regards to freeing up a Yevama to marry someone from the following logic. L'Isser Kares hitarta. We know that in regards to an Isser Kares, we allowed the man to marry his, in our Mishnah from a couple of blot ago, we allow a man to marry his wife's sister if the wife disappears, right? If she dies, or we assume she's dead. And the Isser Lav, what about our case? The Isser Lav of marrying a Yevama, lo kol shekain, all the more so. Says the Gemara, that would be nice, except that it's just factually not correct. She herself is the raya. The Mishnah does allow that, but but it doesn't allow her to marry someone based on her own edus. So therefore, we have no raya from this Kal V'chomer. And says the Gemara, what's the rationale for not trusting her? Why can't we trust her to say about herself that her husband died and therefore she can marry the Yavam. Since sometimes there's a dislike, lo daika uminsabav, she doesn't like her husband, then lo daika, she's not going to do so much research and she'll get married. And eid echad nami keva dezimnan desanyale, since sometimes there's a dislike, that an eid echad might just be kind of tipping the scales and therefore it's going to allow you to marry, to break off your marriage with someone else, and therefore lo daika uminsaba. You may not be fully objective, or as we say, and like loosely in the learning world, you're no gay b'davar. If you don't like your husband, eid echad sufficient, he's dead, and then you're going to remarry, and that may be some serious halachic issues. Have to be careful not to allow our emotions to get in the way. So some poskim discuss this in regards to piskei halacha. Fascinatingly, a person is allowed to paskin their own hilchos nida shailas. You're no gay b'davar. It doesn't matter. We assume because there are isurei kares involved that a person will be very careful. We assume. So that's a similar logic over here, yet this is the reverse of that logic. Here, the Gemara doesn't embrace that logic. That brings us to the 2 dots, 6-7 lines from the bottom of the page. And in these 2 dots, we quote a piece of the Gemara, Ze Midrash Darash Rabbi Elazar ben Masya. What was this talking about? So if you were to look back in the Mishnah that we learned a couple of days ago, this Mishnah is found on the bottom of Tzadi Beis Amud Aleph. We have to see the case inside, otherwise we won't really appreciate this Gemara. So let's learn the last 4 lines of the Mishnah on Tzadi Beis Amud Aleph. The Mishnah on Tzadi Beis Amud Aleph reads the last 4 lines, Amru la meis ba'alech v'niskadsha. Let's say that a woman is told that her husband died and she got engaged to someone else, and then the husband showed up, muteres lachzor lo, she's allowed to break off her engagement with the second guy and marry the first guy. And afal pisha nasan la'achron get lo pasla min hakehuna, and even though the second husband, it was only kiddushin he gave her a get, it doesn't passel her from the kahuna. And then this line, the last line of the Mishnah, is what was quoted in our Gemara. Es zu darash Rabbi Elazar ben Masya v'isha grusha meisha v'lo meisha eno isha. The drasha that he made was a simple drasha, that it's only because of the fact that there was kiddushin and not nisuin that we allow that to happen. But the Gemara really basically says here, I mean, come on, you could have come up with a better drasha. How does this play out? The Gemara says as follows. 6 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Havalei Rabbi Elazar the Medrash Bei Marganisa. He had the opportunity to give a drasha that's equivalent to a pearl, and instead V'darash Bei Chaspa. And instead he gave a drasha that was like a shard of pottery. No, not such a big chiddush. What was the big chiddush? Says the Gemara, my Marganisa. What type of drasha could he have given? Says the Gemara, the Tanya, the Brisa writes as follows, based on the pasuk, V'isha grusha mi isha, and a woman who is divorced, may isha, it's mapike from her man, from her husband. Afidu lo niskarsha el mi isha psula lekahuna, v'hainu reach haget de posel bekahuna. Sometimes, and this is the Marganisa, this is the pearl, this is the better drasha. Sometimes something doesn't pass the smell test, and therefore they have to get divorced. What's the case? Take a look at Rashi, 8 lines from the bottom of the page. Dibur hamaska lo niskarsha el mi isha kigon. Shekasav la get, a man writes a woman a get. The Omar la hare ad mekureshes mimeni, and the get says you are divorced from me. The at muteres lechol adam shalom niskar shazu legamre. If he puts a condition in the get, then not only are we divorced, but you cannot marry anyone. That condition is an invalid condition because it means that they're not divorced. He still has cloud over her, which means they're not divorced. So the Rashi highlights this, that shalom niskar shazu legamre elami isha nifrada, that they have to separate from her husband. And Rashi says she's psula lekahuna. And at the end of Rashi, it says, "V'hainu reach haget." It's like the post of the kahuna doesn't smell good, doesn't smell right. So really, she's not perfectly divorced. Doesn't matter, and we would still passel her for kahuna whenever the divorce finally does take effect, even though the get had a strange tanai in it. Now we've been discussing a case where the man goes out of town and we don't know what happens to him. Now the Mishnah reverses the case. 3 lines from the bottom of Tzadi Daled. Now she goes out of town. Why does that make a difference? We'll see in the Mishnah. Misha halcha ishto le'medinas hayah. A man's wife goes out of town. Ba'u ve'amru lo, and people come over to him and they say, Mesa ishtecha, your wife died while she was traveling. Rahman al-Islam. V'nasa es achosa, and in turn he marries her sisters. You have Rachel and Leah, and Rachel's married to Reuven, and we find out that Rachel dies. Reuven marries Leah. Okay, not Yibum. Just Reuven marries Leah. So it says the Gemara, that's what he did. And then his wife magically returns. So what's the din? Muteres lachzor lo, she is allowed to go back to her husband, which is really strange because, okay, Rachel and Shimon, Reuben was married to Rachel. We thought Rachel was dead, so Reuven married married Shoshana. Reuben married the sister, whatever name I said, whatever Rachel's sister was. But Leah, that was good. So Reuben married Leah. So he married his sister-in-law, even though there's no mitzvah sibum, which is very strange. We'll discuss that in the Gemara. And then when we find out that Rachel is really alive, he's allowed to divorce Leah and go back to Rachel. No. You're not. These are sisters. So because they're sisters, the whole thing is weird. Reuven was married to Rachel, and when Rachel was missing, he married Rachel's sister Leah. And then Rachel showed up, he can divorce Leah and go back to Rachel. There's so many things wrong with that.
What's the hit? He may have been over in Isser, but that's it. Doesn't wave, so to speak, but it goes back. And you fix it. It's fixed quickly, right?
As you've married two sisters while they're both alive.
I didn't say it was a good thing.
Yeah.
Send Leah away.
This also ignores the social politics of sisters sharing a husband, but the Gemara frequently ignores those kinds of things. But where the Gemara is there's a drasha behind this. It's not such a pasha d'zach that like you're just allowed to marry the person's sister while they're still alive. It's not such a thing. So, right. So, exactly. So as we saw earlier in the Maseches. Let me finish the next line because we have to finish all the iterations of this. Umutter bikrovos shnia. And Reuven, who was initially married to Rachel and then was married to Leah and now is married to Rachel again. If Rachel were to die, he could marry the relatives of Leah, even though it's his ex-wife. Okay. Vishnia muteres bikrovav, and Leah is also permissible to marry the brother of Reuven, even though she's lived with him as a wife. Unbelievable. The Mesa Rishona, if Rachel dies, muter b'shnia, he can then fully marry Leah. There's just so many. Yes, Tex.
Can he make the choice, or does he? Can he stay with Leah?
No, because he's an Eshes Ish. He's married to Rachel
because she was first.
So Rashi at the bottom of this page, I was going to learn this now, but I'll just look back at the bottom of Daf Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph. Rashi here has some critical language here. The first Rashi in the new Mishnah says Muteres lachzor lo. Why is it that after Rachel shows up, he can divorce Leah and go back to Rachel? Listen to this language. De kedushe shnia einon klum. The harehi kiznus. The whole kedushin wasn't chal because she's Eshes Ish. Because she's Eshes Ish, but still, I mean, I don't know about not such a big deal. Definitely not getting him after Yonah, that's for sure. But it's still very strange. I would have thought there was a prohibition, even though the marriage wasn't a marriage. It wasn't a marriage. That's
not the same as when a woman marries two men. That there's all kinds of problems that become also about. So you don't have any of that here.
Correct.
So all you need to do is correct the mistake and go back to
there isn't even a mistake to correct. There's nothing that you need to do. You don't actually need to divorce Leah.
Seemingly not even with a get.
It's not a get. From the Gemara, it seems like from the Mishnah, it seems like it's not with a get. We'll discuss some of those iterations in the Gemara. Yeah, there's what to be discussed.
Or is it just a lav?
It's a lav. It's probably Karesh because he's an Eshes Ish. Oh no, not for him. That's on her. That's not him. No, it's probably just a lav. It's nus. That's what Rashi calls it. So that's the first case of the Mishnah. According to Rabbi Akiva, maybe, because Rabbi Akiva holds that mamzeros can be b'chayve lavin. But no, it's not chayve lavin for him. What is it? It's a deraisa of sleeping with a woman. It's a lav. It's a lav. It's a lav. So l'chora it would be, according to Rabbi Akiva, it would be mamzeros. What?
It's not an adulterous relationship, so that. Not going to make the kid a mamzer, right?
It's really complicated because the sister piece is really complicated. Like, do we view the Tashma Shemitah with the sister as Eshes Ish? They're not married.
Rashi calls it snus, which seems to imply no lasting effect.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue. Next case of the Mishnah, 3 lines down, Tzadi Daled Amud Beis. Amru lo Mesa Ishto, if while she's out of town, they said that his wife dies. So Reuven's married to Rachel. Reuven's in town. Rachel's out of town. And the news comes back that Rachel dies. V'nosas achosa. And he marries Leah. Ve'achar kach amrulo, really kayemes haisa umesa. She really was alive when you married Leah. And now she's dead. So, havlad rishon mamzer, ve'achron ein mamzer. A child that was conceived while Rachel was still alive will be a mamzer. And a child that was conceived after Rachel died is not a mamzer. And Rabbi Yossi Omer, and this is incredibly cryptic, we're not even going to get to this today, but we will over the next many blot. Rabbi Yossi Omer, kosher posel al yedei acher and posel al yedei atzmo. Anyone that makes someone else puzzle by other people will make someone else puzzle by themselves, and the reverse. V'chol she'ein posel al yedei atzmo, einu posel al yedei atzmo, and that we will get to. Rashi says, second line, b'gemar mefarish la. It's just so obvious that it's a deep line and needs some commentary. All right, thinking caps. Says the Gemara. We need to know a scenario as follows. There's two sisters. Each of them are married to two random men. So let's keep Rachel and Leah. Reuven's married to Rachel. Leah is married to Levi. The women are sisters. The brothers are not brothers. The husbands are not brothers. And what is the case? V'yafal gav de ozil ishto v'giso. So his wife, let's say Reuven's wife Rachel, v'giso, and his brother-in-law through marriage. It's a brother-in-law through marriage. It's not direct. It's his wife's sister's husband, who is Levi. So his wife Rachel and Levi, they go out of town, the Medina Sayyam. And now the marriage that takes place when we find out that he dies is that basically who's left? Reuven is going to marry Leah. Leah's in town, Levi's out of town. So they find out that the couple, that his wife and her husband die. So they get married. The ahani hani nisuin, the marriage that takes place between Reuven and his sister-in-law Leah, the kamitzera eshes giso agiso, which forbids Leah from remarrying Levi. Afilu hachi eshes giso asira, even though it's true that Leah is now forbidden from Levi, still ishto sharia. He's still allowed to marry his wife if she comes back. Let me say the case again. We have two couples. Reuven's married to Rachel, and Rachel's sister Leah is married to Levi. Now, Reuven's wife Rachel and her brother-in-law Levi go out of town. They have a conference. They're at a conference, and the ship capsizes, and we assume that they're dead. That's what the Eidim say, that they're dead. So now the two remaining people who were not married to each other before, Reuven marries Leah, and then we find out that really they're alive. So what's the din? The din is that Reuven can go back to Rachel, but Levi cannot go back to Leah. V'lo amrinan, we don't say that mitoch shenesra eshes giso agiso, that because Leah and Levi are forbidden to one another, therefore te'aser ishto alav. We have different halachos for these two people, which is a very interesting thing. We don't have time for all the lumdus, but it's a very interesting distinction. And Lema, says the Gemara, maybe our Mishnah is Lema masnisin de lo ke Rabbi Akiva. Why is it not like Rabbi Akiva? The Rabbi Akiva, Havale Achos Grushaso. If that's the case, then his wife is Achos Grushaso. She should be part of a list of people that she's not allowed to marry, that he's not allowed to marry. Havale, Havala, his wife is Achos Grushaso.
He has to divorce Leah, who he married in a second marriage, making Rachel Achos Grushaso.
His own wife.
His original wife, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because is she truly a Grusha, based on what we were saying?
Rashi, fifth line, the lo Rabbi, no, not yet. Not yet. Yeah, the lo Rabbi Akiva, Rashi says, the Ikar Rabbi Akiva, Kevan de Boya Hach Gita Mine, Hoel Havyale Ishto Achos Grushaso, just like you said, David, that's correct. So he had his wife become Achos Grushaso, because he had to divorce Leah, which means from our Mishnah, where we thought B'Pashtus there was no get, there is a get. And why would we think that that it's not Rabbi Akiva, the Tanya? Because the Brisa writes, a third of the way down, Kol harayos shebetorah ein tzrichos hemenu get, chutz mi'eshes ish shenise salpi bezdin. This shita is not the one that's important to us, that the Tanna Kama is of the opinion that when one marries, let's say one sister, a clear case of arayos, there is no get, except for cases where it's eshes ish that married al pi bezdin. Rabbi Akiva Mosif, where else do we need a get? Av eshes ach ve'achos isha. The kevan de Omar Rabbi Akiva boya get mimela itzra alei. Because Rabbi Akiva includes the case of achos isha, that she requires a get, she would automatically become usher to him, to havile achos grushaso. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva cannot be like our Mishnah, because our Mishnah, based on the first framing of the Gemara with the two couples, indicated that Ruvain is allowed to return to his first wife after they find her alive. So that shows us that it's not like Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says that's not true. Halfway down on Tzadi Daled Amud Beis, V'lav Itmar Allah, don't we have a commentary on that brisa about Rabbi Akiva that says as follows: Amar Rav Gidel, Amar Rav Chia bar Yosef, Amar Rav. How do we understand the brisa where Rabbi Akiva includes a case of achos isha with a get, in which case Rabbi Akiva cannot be like our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Hayeshes hechidami. What is the case? Says the Gemara, it must be kigon, a case shekidesh shekadash achiv es isha es haisha. A man he gets engaged to a woman. V'halach leMedina Sayam. This is only engaged, and he goes to Medina Sayam. He goes out of town. V'shama shemeis achiv v'amad v'nasa es ishto. And while he is back in town, he hears that his brother dies, and he marries his brother's friend and requires a get in such a case. The Amre Inshi, the reason they require a get is because we would probably assume that Hach Kama Tano Havala B'Kedushin, V'hai Shapir Nasib. We might have erroneously thought that the first husband had a Tanai. Remember when people would go to war back in the day, they'd have a Tanai, they'd have a conditional get from before they go out of town. Maybe that's what they had over here. And they might assume that the second husband can marry no matter what. And even if the first husband showed up, all is well and good because the Kedushin was retroactively undone. That's not correct. Therefore, we have a get, but really Medina, we don't require a get. And if that's true, maybe our Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva. And as well, says the Gemara, what was the case of achos isha? Kigon, es isha. A man proposes to a woman, and she goes out of town, and we hear that she dies. Amad v'nosa sachosa, and the husband marries her sister. And we might have made an assumption that there was a tanai in the kedushin of the first husband that retroactively undid their marriage. In which case, we would have assumed that her husband can now marry the wife's sister. Komash Malan, that's not true, because maybe that's what's going on with Rabbi Akiva, and that's why there's a get. It's just a chumrah, but Ladina maybe not, in which case our Mishnah could be like Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, that's all fine and good, except for one thing. All of those cases had to do with Kedushin. Elen Nisuin, Meikal Meimar. Is there such a thing as putting conditions on Nisuin? We don't have that. That's like not a thing. You're either married or you're not married. The marriage is not conditional. So therefore, says the Gemara, that's what the Gemara concludes, and therefore Rabbi Akiva was not referring to our Mishnah. And on that note, the Gemara adds another element about Rabbi Akiva as follows: Amar le Ravashi the Rav Kahana. Ravashi says to Rav Kahana, Rabbi Akiva, if our Mishnah is in fact like Rabbi Akiva, our Mishnah which says that a man can marry his wife after she's gone missing, and in the meantime he married her sister, says the Gemara, listening nami chamoso. We should have also included in our Mishnah a case where a man marries his mother-in-law after his wife disappears. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, after a man's wife dies, the prohibition of being with that person's with your wife who died with her mother is lav b'sreifa. It's not the most extreme consequence. Titania, the pasuk reads Ba'eshi surfu oso ve'eshen. He gets killed, ve'eshen, and they get killed. Hard to understand exactly what the words mean. Says the Gemara, Oso ve'es achas man divi Rabbi Shmuel. Only one of them gets killed. He gets killed, and only one of the women. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Oso ve'es shtehen. Rabbi Kiva says both of them get killed. Now, we're not going to get into this, into the lumdus of what we're about to read in full. We'll just do it on a more simplistic level. But if you're looking for a very good, strong Rashi, the Rashi of Oso ve'es shtehen explains all of this in full color. Says the Gemara 10 lines from the bottom. Bishlama le'abaye, I could understand, according to Abaye, why we don't add in the case of Chamoso as another possible case that could have been included, that a man could marry his mother-in-law after the death of his wife. That the machlokas Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva is simply a question of how to understand the psukim. The Rabbi Shmuel savar chada, as we said earlier, the Rabbi Shmuel holds that only one of the women would be killed. The Rabbi Akiva savar tarte ksiv shapir. Then I could understand why our Mishnah doesn't include the case of achoso. Ela le Rava, but according to Rava, de Amar Chamoso la'achar misa ikabeinahu, listening nami Chamoso. But according to the possible understanding of the Machlokas Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, that it's about whether or not there's sreifa with the mother-in-law after death, and Rabbi Akiva was lenient, we should have included the case of Chamoso in our Mishnah, yet we did not. Amar le, you're right that it wasn't included, but you're taking it a little too far. Nihi demiata krami sreifa. According to Rabbi Akiva's understanding, you're right that there is no sreifa in this case between a man and his mother-in-law after his wife dies. But me isura mimiata kram. There still is going to be a prohibition to be with her, and therefore it wasn't included in our Mishnah. Going back to a mechudesh part of our Mishnah, says the Gemara, I don't understand. When his wife goes missing, how can he just marry the wife's sister? Asks the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom. We shouldn't allow this to take place because we had a case where that was seemingly the opposite implication, where we would not allow for this to take place, that a man can sleep with his sister-in-law. Says the Gemara, lo dami, the cases are not identical. Ishto de b'mezid asira midoraisa b'shogeg gazur barabanan. In the case of a woman where she did something b'mezid, where she was slept with a man b'mezid, which is an isser doraisa, therefore b'shogeg, then we would say gazur barabanan. But achos isha, but when it comes to a man who lives with his sister-in-law, which would not forbid him from his wife in the future, the shogeg lo gazur barabana. Says the Gemara, this strange distinction between men and women. And the Gemara wants to know where we know that from. How do we know that a man who is intimate with his sister-in-law doesn't ruin his ability to still be with his wife? Says the Gemara, Tanya, osa. What do we learn from the word osa? Osa shchivta osarta. With her, when she sleeps with someone, it forbids her to her husband. However, when her sister sleeps with her husband, it does not forbid that. Oh, I didn't even know that. And it's this week's parsha. Thank you. It's a good thing someone's doing Shnai Mikra in the room. Says the Gemara.
I don't have to prepare daf yomi.
Touche, it's true. I agree with you. Although before daf yomi started, I was also very bad with Shnai Mikra.
It says in the notes, don't try to say Shnai.
Yeah.
It just says Dvarim Hey. It says Bamidbar Hey. That's enough for David.
Yeah.
I'm happy to know what safer we're in. No, I'm just kidding. I lamed 2 weeks ago. I got it. Says the Gemara, this is the Svara. This is not the Svara. This is the Drasha. It's not logical. It's just a Drasha. The Drasha indicates that if a man sleeps with his wife's sister, that he is still able to return to his wife. Of course, not politically, maybe not practically, but halachically. And then the Gemara says this drasha was meant to offset the following kal v'chomer. Sheyachol v'halo din. Very strange formulation of language. Very strange. Sheyachol, I might have thought, quote, v'halo din, that there is a kal v'chomer to be had. V'halo din, what's the logic? Uma b'makom sheba al iser kal ne'esar ha'oser makom sheba al iser chamor eino din she'ne'esar al ha'oser. I might have thought that if a man slept with a woman who wasn't his sister-in-law, that it ruins his marriage, then all the more so if the woman was achosa, his sister-in-law, because that's its own prohibition in the Torah. Therefore, we needed the drasha to offset this kal v'chomer to make sure that we knew with clarity that if a man is intimate with his sister-in-law, it does not preclude him from returning to his wife. The Brisa continues, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, really that's not right. Lo nechleku beis Shammai uveis Hillel beba al chamoso sheposel es ishto. There is no machlokes between beis Shammai and beis Hillel that one who is with his mother-in-law is posel es ishto. That if the wife returns from Medina Sayyam, that's not a good scenario. That's not good. She comes back from out of town, and all of a sudden her husband is living with her mother. It's not good family politics. So says the Gemara, in that case, it's posela es ishto. That's for sure, says Rabbi Yehuda. And we're going to analyze this shita later. Alman nechlaku, but where does Rabbi Yehuda think there is a machlokes beis Shammai beis Hillel? Bebal achos ishto, when one is intimate with his sister-in-law. Shebeis Shammai omrim posel. Beis Shammai says that's a problem for the husband and wife. Ubeis Hillel omrim lo posel. Now Rabbi Yossi has a divergent view of Rabbi Yehuda. He says as follows: Rabbi Yossi, lo nechlaku beis Shammai beis Hillel bebal achoso alachos ishto shelo posel es ishto. Rabbi Yehuda thought there was a machlokes here. Rabbi Yossi says there is no machlokes here. Of course, it's going to be that the husband is not posel to his wife, even if he sleeps with her sister. Alman nechlaku. Where do beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue, says the Gemara, Biba al chamoso, when a man is intimate with his mother-in-law, and then the wife returns. Beis Shammai omrim posel. Beis Shammai says this ruins the marriage. Ubeis Hillel omrim lo posel. Why does Beis Hillel say lo posel? Let's follow along in this logic. Not difficult, but a little lengthy. Initially, before marriage, each of them can marry anyone they want. But once they get engaged, who osra v'hi asarto. He, because they're married, forbids her from others, and she forbids him from others. However, and we're all but third of the way down on Sadi Hey Amad Aleph, meruba iser she'asra me iser she'asartuhu. But the prohibitions on her are greater than the prohibitions on him. Shehu asra b'chol anashim sheba'olam. He forbids her from marrying any other man in the world, but she cannot stop him from marrying other women other than her family. V'hi lo asartuhu ela b'krovoseha. Yeah, it's true. If I'm engaged to Rachel, then I can't then get engaged to her sister, but I can get engaged halachically to any other woman in the world. Midoraisa, it all works. It's all functional. V'halo dinhu, and that's very logical. Uma hu she'asra b'chol anashim shebe'olam shegaga be'asr la einu ne'eseres b'muter la. When he forbids her from marrying all of the other men in the world, then when there is a shegaga be'asr la, when he's someone that's asr to her, eina ne'eseres b'muter la, she doesn't become forbidden to him. He shelo asar tu el b'krovoseh shagag be'isr be'asr lo eino din shelo ne'esar lo b'muter lo. This indicates that if he is with his sister, then it should be usher, but it won't restrict them from being married. And all of this, says the Gemara, b'zehadin l'shogeg l'mezid minayin. How about a case of mezid? What would be the din then? Says the Gemara, Talmud lomar osa, that even if he is with the sister-in-law b'mezid, it still doesn't forbid him from returning to his wife if she then returns from Medina Saya. Osa, with her, shechivasa osarta. If she is intimate with someone, it does ruin the marriage. Ve'ein shchivas achosa osarta. However, if she, the sister, is intimate with even the husband, it doesn't forbid her. It doesn't forbid him from marrying his wife again. Now, we had said earlier, according to the Shita of Reb Yehuda and the Brisa, he said that there was no machloket Beis Shammai Beis Hillel in the case of Baal Chamoso, that it was poselis ishto. So the Gemara says 3 lines before the wide lines on Sadi Hey Amud Aleph, Amar Reb Ami, Amar Reb Rish Lakish, my time of Reb Yehuda. What was the reason of Reb Yehuda to say that the Chamoso, that his mother-in-law will ruin the marriage? The pasuk reads, Be'eshi surfu oso ve'eshen, v'chibol chol habayis kulo b'sreifa. The wife did nothing wrong. The wife wasn't even in town. The wife did nothing wrong. Not everybody is killed. So says the Gemara, you're right. So why does the pasuk say plural language? Well, im eno inyan l'sreifa. If in fact this pasuk is not talking about sreifa for the wife because the wife was out of town and did nothing wrong, tenehu inyan le'isura. At least we should say that there is an isur. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel says as follows: Ein halacha k'Rav Yehuda. We don't paskin like Rav Yehuda. Rather, we paskin like Rav Yossi, and that in regards to the case of Chamosa, there's a machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. And in fact, the story, and we'll end with these 2 dots on the next line. Hahu de'avad isur bechamase. There was a person who was intimate with his mother-in-law. Asi Rav Yehuda. They brought the shayla to Rav Yehuda. Nagde, he gave him lashes. Amar le, he said to the man who was intimate with his mother-in-law, Ilav de Amar Shmuel ein halacha k'Rav Yehuda. If not for the fact that Shmuel said that the halacha is not like Rav Yehuda and therefore like Beis Hillel, and therefore it doesn't ruin your marriage, asrita alach isr da'olam. I would have forbidden your wife from you forever. That was not the right thing that you did. Even though midoraisa it's mutter, it's not the right thing that you did. We'll stop right here. We're going to be learning again on Shabbos morning at 8 a.m. We'll learn hopefully a blot and a half. It's a lot of material. I hope I can finish it in time. We'll get as far as we can. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Are you recording on Shabbos for people?